They were referring to it publicly as a conspiracy theory in certain conversations.
Dr. Collins called us conspiracy
interviews.
theorists if you believed in the lab as the origin. Tell me why do you think Fauci and Collins took that? I got my theory, and I think I'm right, but I'd like to hear from the Director of National Intelligence what he thinks Fauci and Collins' motivation for sharing false information with the American people.
Well, I think the best evidence of that is their own conversations, which say that they didn't want unwarranted or unwanted, or I think the term was unwanted attention to the relationships that were taking place between Western virologists and those working within the Wuhan Institute of Virology and funding sources for some of that research.
Our money to a lab in China that wasn't up to code, that was doing gain-of-function research, and that's where this thing came from. That's what they didn't want us to know. You agree with that, Mr. Ratcliffe?
I do agree with that.
That's important. Thank you. I yield back.
In November of 2021, Dr. Fauci told Senator Rand Paul under oath that the NIH did not fund gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab, despite having been explicitly told in an email in January of 2021 that NIH had a monetary relationship with the Wuhan Institute through the EcoHealth Alliance. During the committee's initial origins hearing in March, I asked former CDC Director Dr. Redfield whether the NIH was funding or had funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute, and he told me, direct quote, "No doubt," unquote, NIH was funding this research in Wuhan, refuting Dr. Fauci's claims. I'll start with you, Mr. Ratcliffe. Do you agree with Dr. Redfield?
I do.
Given what we know now, if you were in Dr. Fauci's position, would you have denied that the NIH's role in gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab?
No.
Do you think that Dr. Fauci lied under oath?
I think that some of Dr. Fauci's testimony is inconsistent with some of the intelligence that we have that remains classified, as well as inconsistent with some information that is publicly available. Those are based on scientific information, and none of this is political. None of this is disputed. There is currently no environmental source identified for COVID-19. There is no intermediate host that has ever been identified. There is no reservoir species that has ever been identified. And COVID-19 was never known to exist in any animal or species before the pandemic began. Those are scientific facts that are not disputed, and there's nothing political about that. That factored into the determinations that have been made. And what I talked about before about this shift taking place, the things that I just related early on, the intelligence community was briefed by various scientists who said those answers will come. They referenced SARS-1 and MERS outbreaks and saying, look, it may take several months, even a year, sometimes even longer to identify an intermediate host or a species. We're now at 3.5 years, and every day that passes makes it less likely that there's anything that will ever tie this to nature, whereas on the other side of the ledger, it's overwhelming when you look at China's actions and the circumstances surrounding what was going on from a biosafety standpoint at Wuhan, the massive number of coronaviruses, the massive numbers of bats carrying coronaviruses that were brought into Wuhan. All of that weighs heavily into making assessments at some confidence level that a lab leak was the origin for this pandemic.